Hello, everyone. It's the Just a Couple of Bagels podcast back again. We're still locked up, still not on a tennis court. And I'm sort of losing the amount of options that I can do. I can't do anything, Sam. I'm sitting on my Todd.
We got very close to tennis court yesterday.
Yes, we did.
Closest we've been all year, Sam.
Well, you got to the gate.
I got to the gate and I also had a tennis racket for the first time this year as well. So that was exciting.
For all the people that don't know, we've branched out and we've made an Instagram account.
Yes, we have. Yes.
So that'll include, so please give that a follow. It's no spaces, it's all lowercase, it's just a couple of bagels. Quite nice and simple.
Very simple.
So you'll get notified.
We'll leave a link.
Yes, we'll leave a link.
We'll leave a link in the description.
What do we put on there? We'll put up notifications when we do one of these. We have little coaching tip videos on there.
Yeah. We're following the Australian Open a little bit, so
supported the Brits while they were there.
Yeah, while they were there, yeah. We got to Grand Prix.
Yeah, we did. I mean, did you watch any of that match?
Watched highlights. So, I mean, it was always going to be Nadal, wasn't it? But he put up a good fight to him. On his second set,
I thought it was good.
Good fight. It's a good fight for him. To be fair, it'd be nice if you clinch one set, but Nadal is a force to reckon with. But to be honest with you, after watching the highlights, I think Djokovic is my favourite.
Really, even though he's dropped 3 sets already.
Yeah, I just think the way Nadal, I don't know, I wasn't convinced. I think the Djokovic will pull it out. I think the Djokovic does, let's say, he'll pull it out in the bit when it counts. It's like when Usain Bolt used to run his, over 100 meters in the qualifiers, in the heats. He was never fully running. He was conserving energy. He was jogging past the finish line. He was keeping it easy. So when he got to the final race, he had all the energy and he was going to win it easily. I think that's what Djokovic is doing now. He's he knows he can win these matches, so he's not 100% giving it his all.
Okay.
He might drop an odd set, but I don't think there's not much concern for him.
But then I think when I've watched Rafa, it takes him a week to sort of get up to speed with any slam. Well, that's what I've got when watching him.
Except for the French Open.
Oh yeah, he's just.
There's no point in us turning up.
Have you managed to watch any more? Because you're obviously still working.
Yeah, still working. So no, I just kind of watch highlights. Sometimes, like in the morning, I'll catch a few games of a match that's on, but I haven't really, I haven't been able to keep up to date as much as I would like to. But when the French and all that starts, I'll be much more involved in keeping up to date with everything that's going on.
Yes. Well, this week's podcast, we have another guest.
Very exciting. Guest number 2.
And guest number 2 is David Paterson, who we both know very well.
We do. When I was a junior, he ran like loads of competitions around that I competed in. So I've known him for a very long time.
Well, I'm sure he'll be a very, very good guest to have because he's got big shoes to follow. Because Yarrick was a very, very good start.
It was a very, very good start. Yeah, it was a very popular start. It was basically Yarrick asked one question. That was it.
We'll look forward to it anyway. We'll look forward to it.
But Dave, so Dave's a very, very experienced coach. He's an experienced player. He'll be very knowledgeable in the area and have, I'm sure, a good story or two to tell us.
Well, we look forward, and we hope everyone else listening will enjoy it as well.
Yes, 100%.
Right, Dave, can you hear us?
I can hear you, Tom. How are you?
Hi, Dave.
I'm very
Sam.
well.
Hi.
How are you doing cooped up at home?
I'm doing fine, Tom. I'm a very busy person, actually, during the lockdown. I'm keeping myself very busy, yeah.
Out of trouble.
Well, trying to. Always try and keep out of trouble, Sam.
Well, we'll get straight into it. did you manage to listen to any of the podcasts with Yarrick on, Dave, to give you a little bit of...
I did. Yes, it was very interesting. Yarrick came across very well, and good insight into life back in Poland and his career and his career path over to this country, and what he's done. Very talented individual is Yarrick.
Yes, 100%.
He definitely is. Well, we'll get straight on to the first part, and this is a bit I didn't know. We'll start off right at the beginning.
Okay.
Day one.
Day one. I didn't know this, that your dad was a tennis coach.
Yes, indeed he was. Back in those days, there was very few coaches around. In fact, when I started coaching 40 years ago, there were very, very few coaches. You probably could count them on one hand how many there were in the whole of the area. But certainly back in my father's day, there was probably only, I would guess, 2 or 3 in the Lancashire, Cheshire, Northwest area that were professional tennis coaches.
Wow.
Right, okay. So how did that work with like local tennis clubs then? So did you just turn up to a local tennis club and play and not get coached? Or like, because obviously like, I imagine if you have one coach, they're only going to be able to coach in a very small radius. So how did that work out?
How did it work out? Sorry, I missed the
Sorry, so
question.
Yeah, so just wondering, like, obviously, if there's only like 3 coaches in the area in the Northwest, let's say, what did you do to get coaching? Like, how, like, if I was a player,
coaching just was not a culture back then. You
Right,
very,
okay.
very, very limited. I mean, clubs just didn't have coaches. Full stop. Certainly back in my father's day, and as I repeat, when I started coaching around the turn of 1980. More seriously, none of the clubs had coaches. So I was a very, very busy, although I was head coach at Bramall Park and Alderley Edge, I was doing work at all the Northeast Cheshire coaches. So Prestbury, obviously, Bramall Queensgate, Bramall Lane, Woodside, you name it. I would go round and maybe do a couple of hours here, a couple of hours there. But my main base, because it was at the time it was quite a forward-thinking club, Bramall Park. They took me on as their head coach, and we had a very good program. Something probably more along the lines of what you would expect nowadays in clubs. But back in my father's day, he did something very similar. Went round, and I remember going with him as the ball boy. I mean, you didn't have coaching baskets in those days. He went off to these clubs to coach, and he might have had a dozen balls, and he relied on me to chase around at the back when I was about sort of 7, 8, 9 years of age, and collect the balls and rush them back to him, and that's how he operated. But you didn't have coaching baskets. In fact, once again, because I was one of the very few coaches around in the late 70s, I managed to get hold of a coaching basket that was very, very new to everybody. Everybody was fascinated on how a coaching basket operated. They couldn't understand how these balls disappeared underneath. I mean, everybody sort of takes it almost for granted these days, but that's how it was.
I still get a few kids who are mesmerized by how a tennis basket works.
Yes, the youngsters still do. Yeah.
So how did it work? Because I'm not educated enough to know this, but as for the coaching education system now, we obviously have different levels. So we've got level 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And it's a very sort of inclusive way of people becoming coaches? Was it like that when you were becoming a coach, when your dad was becoming a coach?
Yeah, well, it was very similar when my father became a coach. He took professional examinations and you became a registered professional. And of course, pre-1968, before open tennis came, then professionals were professionals, and they had their own little professional tennis tournaments, of course, like the main tennis players, the good tennis players. They went off onto a separate pro circuit, didn't they? Most of the top players, the Rod Lavers, the Ken Rosewalls, the Lou Hodes, the Pancho Gonzalez's of this world, once they got to a level at the top of the amateur game, they went into the pros. Now at the lower level, you sort of went in to become a professional tennis coach, and that enabled you then to go out and teach people with a degree of certification. Obviously, for many years, and even in the early years of my career, I mean, people could, in a way, go out and coach without any certificates. But now they've clamped down much more on that now with everything they've brought into place. You not only have to have a professional coaching award, but you obviously have to have your DBS and your safeguarding and all these sort of other things to be able to coach in clubs.
Sure. Would you say like the examinations have got harder over time or easier?
I think they've got harder. There were 3 levels, level 1, 2, and 3, and now you've got 5 levels. Or at every level, it is much more difficult. I mean, to be honest, the level 1 back in my day in the 70s, yeah, you just really needed to turn up and know what end of the racket to hold, and virtually you were able to pass level 1. It brought in a lot of people that call themselves coaches, which in fact were not very good at all. They couldn't really play the game. They didn't know much. And I think the quality and the levels have gone up much more in recent years, and particularly I think in the last 10 to 15 years, they overhauled all the coaching certification back around 2006-07, and I think that did a lot to raise the bar on coaching qualification. And certainly from the people I know that go through their level 4s and 5s these days, it's a long haul. It's a long haul that they have to do. I mean, back in the old days, to get your full coaching certificate, you actually went for a 2-week residential course at Lilleshall, and it was only held once a year, and it was a 2-week course.
Right. Okay. Yeah. That's interesting.
Well, it's no wonder then you got put into the world of tennis. Do you feel because your dad was a coach, do you feel that tennis was thrusted upon you, or did you just naturally gravitate towards it?
No, it was thrusted upon me, really. And obviously looking back on it, I have no regrets. Sometimes when I was a young teenager and I was being dragged out onto the tennis court or dragged out and going with him to tennis clubs on tennis lessons that he was taking, sometimes I would feel a bit anti it, but certainly looking back, he did me a huge favor, because tennis certainly opened up a huge amount of things for me and became my life, became not my total career, because I went and studied and I became a physical education teacher. I went to Loughborough University. I did 20 years at teaching in a school, and I coached as a part-time basis. In fact, I've never ever been a full-time coach. I've always had a full-time sort of salaried job as well, because when I left teaching after 20 years, I joined the LTA, and an opportunity came up in the mid-90s, and I became the county development officer for Cheshire, and that was a full-time job. But even then, I was always doing some coaching on the side, as it were.
Very interesting. Well, your dad certainly must have been good at his job, because you became quite a good junior. You won 5 Lancashire County titles at under 16 and under 18. You're ranked in the top 10 in your in the country at under 18, and this is a very, very good achievement. You reached the quarterfinals of the Junior Wimbledon.
Well, I had a pretty good junior career, I have to admit. I know, and thank you for highlighting those stats. And he started me off, and he instilled in me a good philosophy of how to get the ball into court, which has still stayed with me, and I try and pass on to others. It was a different sort of game in those days, as you well know, than it is now. But the key essence in tennis is you've got to get the ball over the net and into that court. Nowadays, it's more about getting it over the net into the court and hitting it with a degree of pace. Technology has transformed the game over the years, as you know, and we play, and you've played, you probably know, and you know no different to playing with these rackets that have evolved over the last 40 years and that developed so much more power, and the strings have developed, and it's just revolutionized the way the game is now played. And particularly the one shot that it has changed dramatically is the forehand, and that's completely different to how it was 30 years, 40 years, and certainly 50 years ago. And if you met a lot of players of my era, and you probably might have picked up on it if you've ever seen me hitting tennis balls, that I use a continental grip, which is a grip that you would not ever want any of your pupils to be using, and you'd steer them away from it. But back in my day, that was a sort of almost go-to grip, and many of the players were using it. And the last players to sort of have a semi-continental, McEnroe was a little bit continental, Edberg was, but certainly during the 90s, it was becoming less and less and less. And now you wouldn't see a top player using a continental grip.
What did you use that grip? Because obviously the serve volley was just so big then. It was just
correct, Sam. Yeah, it was more serve volley, and they tended to use that grip. And it had been a grip that many of the players. You go and see some footage of Fred Perry, for example, when he was playing. Now, Fred Perry actually deliberately took time out from playing competitions to develop his continental grip even more so, which you think is actually very bizarre, but that's the way it was. But coming back to your question, I've sort of deviated off your question, and you were highlighting, I think you were asking me about my junior career, yes, I was successful at county level, and I went on and played Junior Wimbledon, which I have to say was not the Junior Wimbledon that we kind of know of today. It wasn't the international Junior Wimbledon that's held during the Wimbledon Championship. I wasn't at that level, but at the time, it was basically the national 18s, which was always held at the All England Club, and we always referred to it as JW, Junior Wimbledon, right, and it was the talking point of us all during the season. trying to get, and that was the highlight and the most prestigious thing to get to for your season end. And it came usually after the county championships in early September, and it was always just referred to as Junior Wimbledon. But I have to underline, it wasn't the international Junior Wimbledon where players are coming from all over the world, as you know of today during the championship. But still, it was, at the time, it was it's quite a prestigious thing, and I was fortunate enough in one year to have a good run and ended with a loss to the great Buster Mottram, one of our greatest post-war British tennis players. He eventually went on to reach highest ranking number 15 in the world. But interestingly, he did play in the proper Junior Wimbledon in 1971, reached the final, and you know who he lost to?
No.
Bjorn Borg.
Oh wow!
In the final of the Junior Wimbledon, the proper Junior Wimbledon in 71. Buster Mottram was a great clay court player, I was, my favourite surface was clay. In other words, I played most of my early tennis on shale courts, as there were in those days. A lot of shale courts. All clubs had shale courts that are the closest cousin to clay courts. And but Buster Mottram was just supreme on it, and he took everybody apart, certainly in this country, in his age group. And I came up against him, and although we had rallies of maybe 50, 60 shots, he would always come out on top. But yeah, it was great fun, and he was a top player at the time.
That's a brilliant story, because I mean, you downplayed it a little bit, as it wasn't, as you said, the proper Junior Wimbledon, but still, it must have been a great privilege to play at Wimbledon.
Oh, hugely. I mean, we all dream of, every tennis player always dreams of playing at Wimbledon in some form or other.
Yeah.
And although I never achieved the levels to get there to proper Wimbledon, at least I had many occasions to play at Wimbledon, because not only were the national 18 championships held there, as I've just described, but when I was representing Lancashire as a county player, we used to have a fixture against the All England club. So I had another opportunity to play there. And I also had other opportunities when I played for the University of Loughborough team. We played on a match. I don't know why it was called a UAU match, and for some reason we played at Wimbledon. I can't exactly remember, but we did play, and I've actually played on the grass there as well, on some of the grass at the back of the Wimbledon, sort of the second tier grass courts. But it's a great club. And what was also good about it, when we went there as juniors back in sort of almost 50 years ago now, you could roam around Wimbledon and there was no security. You could wander onto the centre. I've got this great photograph of me standing in my tennis kit with my tennis racket on centre court, and a pal of mine took a picture of me from the Royal Box, and I've got that. You couldn't do that. There's absolutely no way you could even get. You can't even get through the gate without, even if you go there for any meetings. And I occasionally have to go to Wimbledon for this meeting or that meeting, but they don't even allow you in without ID now. You can't even get past the gate. So back in the day when you could just roam around everywhere. And the other good thing was we used the changing rooms that the top players use. So you got all the insight of the changing rooms and where all the top players were. And it was fascinating. And as you see on the television, you know, Wimbledon, they don't spare at all on the quality of whatever they do, and just everything is just absolutely first class. So you go into the changing rooms, and there's a little the changing room attendant in those days was a guy called Leo, a little chap that used to carry the bags and the towels out on finals day. You're probably too young to remember it, but back in, you know, sort of maybe 20, 30 years ago, used to get this the main changing room attendant coming out, and he was called Leo, and he used to be there, and he'd say, "Oh, do you want a bath, sir?" And I'd go and run a bath for you, and this, that, and the other. And the facility was superb, and that was on more so. That was on representative matches, more so when I was playing for Lancashire against the Ornan Club. We didn't really get that so much when we were there as juniors, although, as I say, we could roam around the whole clubhouse and the courts without any security. Have you ever been to Wimbledon out of the Wimbledon fortnight? Have you been down there?
No, I was going to say that I'd love to actually go down to Wimbledon when it's not so busy, because I've been to Wimbledon twice, and it's obviously packed.
You ought to go. And if you go into Wimbledon centre court outside Wimbledon, now they've got, I mean, the security wires, you know, there's electronic wires around the court, there's cameras, you couldn't get anywhere close to it. So it's a whole different ball game, as many other aspects of life are.
Yeah, so security everywhere is now so different compared to, like, you know, 30, 40 years ago. So
sure,
but it's just definitely something I want to go and see Wimbledon when it's not, because I can just imagine how different it is when there's like less people there, because obviously the experience is different obviously when the tournament's on, but you know, when there's not many people there, I can imagine the atmosphere is just, you know, quite weird, quite different, obviously very different, but
totally,
you know, amazing though at the same time.
If you're down in London, you want to sort of maybe take time out and go on one of the Wimbledon tours that they'll do, and take you around. Have you been in the Wimbledon Museum?
I went for it slightly. I haven't done it properly though.
No,
I don't know if it was actually the proper Wimbledon Museum. It was open on tournament during the competition. I don't know if it was actual.
Yeah, well, yes, that will be the Wimbledon Museum.
Okay, yeah. So I didn't get around properly.
Full of everything. It's very good, very good.
Yeah.
So you probably could take the Wimbledon Museum in with a Wimbledon tour and have somebody take you around and giving you all the information about Wimbledon. It's fascinating, absolutely fascinating.
100%. Yeah, something we'll have to do, mate.
You clearly lived in a much better time, Dave, being able to go around with no security.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, that is absolutely fascinating. I didn't expect to have a whole in-depth knowledge on Wimbledon. That was brilliant. What we're going to talk about now is a little bit more towards your coaching career. And there was one question that popped up when you were talking about the continental grip. Is there any way that your coaching style or philosophy, however it has been since when you started coaching to what it is now, how has that developed? How has it progressed?
Oh, hugely. It's ever evolving, and over the last 40 years, the changes I've noticed within myself have been immense, and rightly so. If I look back at David Paterson, the tennis coach in 1980, I would cringe, and obviously you do as you do in life. You try and better yourself and improve yourself, and learn from others. And other coaches were coming on the scene. They were pushing you. There was two or three other guys that came on in the 80s, or probably more. There was a group of coaches. You probably know some of them, or not, if not all of them. Roger Cal came into the area in the mid 80s. We had Jim Edgar starting his coaching career around a similar time. We had Dave Samuel working out of Match Point, which was the indoor centre, which is, do you know where Match Point was?
Yeah,
which is the Total, where Total Fitness is now.
No.
That was the main indoor centre. And then there was a coach that's based on the Wirral, guy called Nick Lawrence. So there was 4 or 5 good coaches, and once you see other coaches and seeing what they're doing, what they're bringing to the table, then you have to then look and reflect and think, I must change and up my game or do this, and that's a good idea. I think in the first podcast, I remember you mentioning, Tom, how working at David Lloyd has possibly helped you, because you were rubbing shoulders with the likes of Brent Parker and Simon Thornywell and maybe 1 or 2 others. And that's the way that you've got to try and learn and develop your career. So yes, all the time you are trying to make yourself better. And then they came on board with the CPD and the courses that you had to take to keep your license. I obviously joined the LTA, and they put on lots of other courses specifically for us as well, as LTA personnel. I then went on. I did a short stint as being the talent and performance coordinator, and I had the benefit of going on many sessions with the likes of Louis Kaya, who again Yarrick mentioned Louis. Now Louis, great Canadian coach. He did some work with Greg Ruzetsky back in his early days. He came over to this country in the mid noughties, mid to late noughties. He met an English lady, and he decided to come and settle here. He didn't really have any work, and there was another coach at the time called Brian McFadden, and Brian was the county performance coach. I was the county development officer, and we both worked very, very closely together, and we wanted to up the level of coaching knowledge, and we set up these coaching sessions and brought in people like Louis Kaya to run them. And it was there that I think Yarrick mentioned that he spoke to Louis, and Louis was a great and still is. He's been immensely influential, not only in the coaching setup of this country, but also in the players. The fact that Jamie Murray has done as well as he has in doubles is partly down to Louis and many of the other British tennis players, particularly in the doubles area. But he quietly had influences on Andy Murray as well. He was quite close with Judy Murray and Andy Murray. So I'm sort of losing track here where I'm going to. What was your question again?
It was just about your...
my coaching. That's right. And so all these things are continually developing your ideas and your knowledge and the way that you're approaching your coaching. So very much totally changing over the years and still evolving and still learning. And that's what it's all about, as in life.
Well, I'm very glad that you mentioned Nick Lawrence, because I was very fortunate on my level 3 to have him. I think it was certainly the first 2 modules. He was one of the tutors, and he was very, very interesting to listen to. The one thing that I took away from him, even when he's coaching coaches, how to coach, that I was saying coach too many times. He had a way of making everything he said sound very, very interesting.
Yes. Yes, he does. Nick has got a good way with words. He's got a good way of putting things across, and yeah, he's got a good personality and gets into the players and knows what he wants from them, and he gets it from the way his personality comes across. And when he first appeared on a tennis court next to me at match point, it was about 1986, I think. That's circa 1986. He was just a whirlwind of energy and enthusiasm, and quite honestly made me look ridiculously silly. And I thought, my goodness, he is one that I looked upon, and I thought, well, crikey, I certainly have got to change here. And as I say, on the likes of Jim Edgar and Roger Cowell and Dave Samuel, they all brought something different to the table, and it was good to have around. But I'm pleased to hear that you enjoyed Nick as a tutor. I always remember seeing him take a pupil, and he brought the pupil to the net, and he quickly got hold of the young lad's watch off his wrist and ripped it off. It was one of these elasticated wristbands. He was able to do it, and he was just making a point that it's important that he wanted to take time away from him. In other words, that's what tennis. That's what tennis. Sometimes tennis is all about. You're trying to take time away from your opponent, and it was just an interesting way of getting his point across, and whipping his.
I do like that. That's very clever. That's really clever. I like that.
Yeah. He was a brilliant character. Definitely on that course. He was definitely one of the highlights of my level 3 course.
Yes, he would have made it fun. He would have made it interesting, and he's always got a little joke to go in here, there, and everywhere. Yeah.
I think the one thing I took away from him, he always said to me, I always look generally angry at something with my resting face.
Yes.
Which comes on, and I don't think I've ever wondered about this or asked this. How did you go from the coaching side into tournament organization of what you're doing now?
Right. So, Roger Cowell was many titles, but basically he was the Northwest Regional Tennis Development Officer, then manager, whatever title they had at the time. And he came into the Northwest in the late 80s, and I struck up a very close friendship with Roger, a close personal friendship. And then I joined the LTA, as I say, in the mid 90s. He was actually my line manager, because he was the Northwest regional manager. I was and his job was to oversee the county development officers. Anyway, in many conversations, we both had the same sort of thinking about competition, and at the time we realized that there was very little competition to be had around the country. It wasn't that easy. You probably see competition now much more accessible, which it is. But back then, we were very, very keen that the competition was the mainstay of our sport, because there was no point in just going and hitting practice balls, going to have a coaching session, and there was nothing to go and test our skills. Okay, yes, you had the odd little league matches going on, but there weren't the competitions. And we always sort of used to reflect on other countries. If you were in France in that period, every weekend you'd be able to go and access a competition somewhere. So competition was very much a a strong higher priority in my thinking. And when I became county development officer, that carried on through in what I was also doing as a county development officer. It was a broad brief. I mean, a county development officer was not only involved in dealing with facilities at clubs, competition, coaching, also the whole spectrum, but competition was quite a highlight. And I tried to bring on more and more competition on board in the mid to late 90s. And I did so quite successfully. I was also quite keen on knowing more about the rules and becoming a referee. And I decided to take the APTO referee exam, and I took that. I wasn't refereeing much at the time because I was too busy with everything else. But when I came to leave the LTA and I came into this so-called semi-retirement, which I wanted to just do a little bit of coaching, and I wanted to do more competition. And it started back around 2010 that I got into doing more competition, and that's just snowballed over the last decade to what I do now, which is sort of 90% competition, and I do about 10% coaching. So that's, how it came about, really.
See, I always remembered you from being a junior as being the competition organizer. I think, I did a competition at least like 2-3 times a month, and it was always, you was always the one like heading it up.
Yes.
So
yeah,
that's why.
Well, we were. I'll have to say that in Cheshire we were well ahead of most other counties in how much competition was put on. And I used to organise, circuits for different age groups. We had booklets. We had that because it was a bit pre the everybody getting onto the internet and everything, and we had booklets, and it was more paper entry forms and all this sort of stuff. But it started everybody thinking that they needed to incorporate competition. There was competition to be had everywhere. It also it linked into the mini tennis boom, which started around the millennium, because that's when it really started to kick off big time. And so I started to develop more and more mini tennis tournaments, got all the clubs on board to input dates that they would run sessions. So we had this plethora of tournaments all around the county that the youngsters could go at, and these were just low level competitions, and they weren't graded at that time, like we have the grades, sort of 5, some 4s and 3s. These were just competitions that local clubs, Prestbury were, for example, putting on a little competition, and kids would come along, and hopefully a lot of their own club members would enter. So that was going on, and we became quite noted. A lot of people, when we also started to develop more higher level competitions via the LTA, again, I got the main centres, the main indoor centres particularly, to start putting on competitions. And thankfully nowadays I think we've got a level of tournaments that people can think, right, we can go to a tournament virtually every week that's not too far away.
I totally agree. I think from all your competitions, I think it always gave you something to work towards, like as a player, because as you're saying, it's, you don't have a match or you don't play a match, you don't actually know how good you are. No. It's all good playing well in training, but at the end of the day, going out, going to competition, and then that's where you really find out how good you are.
Exactly.
Because that's where the pressure's involved, and you want to win, and but that's what I totally agree with what you're saying there. What I was just thinking is, have you found there's been like a change in discipline in players over the course of you doing competitions? Like, do you find players are less well behaved in court, or they? Sometimes when I coach now, I feel like sometimes people just play because their parents are forcing them to be there. Or do you find that in competitions now, like players are just sometimes
no.
Okay.
I think the level of discipline has not changed. You're always going to find individuals that have personalities and are fiery. Listen, I'll hold my hands up. When I was a junior, I wasn't the most angel kid on the court, and I used to fire up, and my dad used to go crazy with me to trying to work out ways of making me behave. And I used to flare up. And over the years, there've been kids that have meltdowns, and some of our best kids, and we've got kids nowadays that that we just know when they come to tournaments, you're going to have trouble. It's in their DNA, it's in their personality. They're just going to flare up if something goes wrong. So to generalize, to say it's better or it's worse, I wouldn't go that far. Certainly I think we have more of a code of conduct now that allows us to discipline the players more. I think that's come on board much more in the last 10 years or so. But humans and people are people, that they're going to lose it if that's their nature.
Yeah, that's fair enough.
Very true. Sort of linked to that question, Dave. What about the quality? Have you seen a change in quality of the players that turn up to your competitions, whether that's in mini red, mini orange, green, or full yellow ball? Standards
have increased generally, like in everything. You look back at the standard of juniors, to generalize, the level, in my opinion, has increased. Again, if I look at myself, and I look at juniors that are playing, say, I don't know, some of the better 14-year unders at grade 3, and I'm thinking how well they are playing and hitting the ball, and I would just struggle to think myself, if I was transported to play that player when I was sort of 17, 18, I would lose. But then again, you only have to look at old footage of players back in the 60s, even one of the greatest players of all time, and I always considered the greatest of all time, Rod Laver. I mean, the only player to win 2 proper Grand Slams, 62 and 69. If you transported him against a Federer or a Nadal or a Djokovic today, he would probably lose. The great Bjorn Borg, I mean, one of the greatest. He's got to be in the top 3 or 4 greatest players of all time. But the standards have just improved. But what I'm trying to say is, again, with the juniors, the next lot of juniors are pushing the next lot on, and I think the general standard is getting better. Some of these youngsters now are just hitting the ball so hard and so well at 11, 12 years of age. It's frightening to see. But we have exceptions. I mean, obviously, you go back to a couple of our Cheshire juniors back in the 90s, Simon Dixon and Mark Hilton. I don't know whether you remember those 2 names. Simon Dixon, he's now actually coaching down in Birmingham, but Simon was one of the top players in the world at sort of 13, 14 years of age, had wins over the likes of Federer and Nalbandian and Hewitt and these sort of guys. Yes, those 3 players went on and to great heights. Unfortunately, Simon didn't make that breakthrough, as has happened with so many good juniors. You only have to look at the winning roster of proper junior Wimbledon champions, the international junior Wimbledon champions. You look at the roster, you look at the number of players that you recognize that have gone on to become world-class players. It's the percentage is probably only about 25%. So many of them just fall by the way. To make that transition is huge. But to sum up, I would say that the standard has generally got much better.
It's good to hear. And to be fair, having you on, I think, has upped the standard of this podcast dramatically. That was some very good insight.
Okay.
We'll finish with one more question. And this is sort of the part where, because we call this part of the podcast Consulting the Oracle. Dave, you are the Oracle today. Have you got any words of wisdom or advice for young coaches such as me and Sam? I know you alluded to learning off very experienced coaches. Anything else? Well,
there's so much you could add to that, and I probably would need another podcast to give all the tips and hints over the last 40 years. But I think it's important that you've got to treat it like a skill or any other skill or profession, and think about continually improving yourself and how you do that. And Yarrick, I think, mentioned how when he was getting into the coaching, certainly into the tennis coaching back in this country, that he started to try and absorb as much knowledge as possible, reading, watching, rubbing shoulders with experienced coaches, not maybe taking everything that you see, but trying to pick the good bits and seeing if you can adapt it into your style of coaching. But there's a lot more to that in order to give tips for young coaches. I mean, first and foremost, I think hopefully you're passionate about the game, and you want to impart that into other people. And a big thing for me is as well, and this is just life generally and whatever you do, but make sure that you're highly professional. You don't let people down. You return calls to people in a very timely manner, and just carry yourself highly and keep yourself in a top professional state at all times.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Dave. I'm sure we'll definitely have you on again, because that was a very, very good podcast, if I do say so myself.
Oh, well, that's very good of you, Tom. I appreciate it. And look after yourselves and enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you, Dave.
Thank you very much, Dave.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Yes, bye.
Well, that comes to the end of another podcast, Sam.
Yes, very insightful one.
It was indeed. Well, I certainly enjoyed that, and I'm guessing, Sam, you enjoyed that as well?
Yeah, it's very, very interesting. Everything, it was a very good podcast. Very informative.
Right, well, we hope you enjoyed that at home, wherever you are listening. We hope you are at home, because you shouldn't be out anywhere. It's definitely in the UK. This was the Just a Couple of Bagels podcast. Please do like and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.
See you guys. Bye.